There are moments in life when it feels like God is distant, silent, and unreachable. People pray, seek answers, and wait for direction, yet they remain confused and lost. But what if the problem isn't that God isn't speaking, but that something is blocking the connection? Many unknowingly create spiritual barriers that prevent them from hearing God's voice with clarity. Distractions, negative influences, and internal struggles can act as walls that separate the mind from divine guidance. Joyce Meyer teaches that to truly walk in faith, these obstacles must be removed. Only then can God's voice become clear and unmistakable. This is not about learning something new, but about removing what is in the way. Imagine a radio signal full of static. The message is there, but the interference makes it impossible to understand. The same happens in the spiritual realm. By eliminating these 7 barriers, the connection with God becomes stronger, clearer, and deeper. If you have ever struggled with doubt, confusion, or frustration when trying to hear God, this message will open your eyes. Joyce Meyer reveals the hidden obstacles that may be preventing divine direction in your life. Are you ready to remove the interference and finally hear God's voice clearly? One of the biggest reasons people struggle to hear God's voice is the constant noise surrounding them. The world is filled with distractions, social media, endless entertainment, and constant notifications. Joyce Meyer teaches that if you want to experience true spiritual clarity, you must learn to silence the noise and create space for God to speak. Are distractions blocking your connection with God? The Bible reminds us that God speaks in a gentle whisper, 1 Kings 19 verse 12, not through chaos and loudness. Yet, many people say, "I don't hear from God," while spending hours consuming content that pulls them away from His presence. If your mind is constantly occupied, how will you recognize the voice of the Holy Spirit? Have you been giving God enough quiet time to speak? Distractions are not always sinful, but they can steal your spiritual focus. If your time with God is reduced to a few minutes of rushed prayer while scrolling through your phone, your spiritual life will suffer. Setting aside dedicated time for prayer, Bible study, and worship is key to breaking free from distractions. How much time are you truly giving to God? To develop a life aligned with God's purpose, you must intentionally remove distractions. Start small. Limit unnecessary screen time, create moments of silence, and prioritize quality time in His presence. Many people think they don't have time for God, but the reality is, they are just too distracted. What distractions do you need to cut out of your life? If you want to unlock divine clarity and hear God's direction, you must be willing to remove the excess noise. It's not about eliminating everything, but about prioritizing what truly matters. Are you willing to make space for God to speak, or will you let distractions continue to control your mind? The people you surround yourself with affect your spiritual growth more than you realize. Some relationships bring encouragement, wisdom, and faith, while others pull you away from God's purpose. Joyce Meyer teaches that if you want to hear God clearly, you must evaluate who is influencing your life. Are the people around you strengthening or weakening your faith? The Bible warns us, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character, 1 Corinthians 15 verse 33. Even if you have a strong desire to grow spiritually, surrounding yourself with negative, faithless, or toxic individuals will slow down your journey. The voices you listen to will either lead you closer to God or fill your mind with doubts and distractions. Who has the most influence over your thoughts and decisions? This doesn't mean you should completely cut people out of your life, but it does mean you must set boundaries. If certain relationships constantly drain your energy, push you towards sinful behaviors, or make you doubt your faith, it's time to reevaluate their place in your life. Are you prioritizing relationships that bring you closer to God? Sometimes, it's difficult to recognize how much others influence us until we take a step back. If you feel spiritually distant or struggle to stay committed to your faith, ask yourself, Who are you allowing to shape your mindset? Surround yourself with people who speak life, encourage your faith, and push you toward your divine calling. Are you connected to people who align with God's purpose for your life? If you want to live a life aligned with God's will, you must be intentional about who you walk with. The right people will inspire and challenge you to grow, while the wrong influences will pull you away from your destiny. What changes do you need to make in your relationships to hear God more clearly? Many people block their spiritual growth without realizing it. One of the biggest barriers is a judgmental and critical spirit. Joyce Meyer teaches that constant criticism, whether toward others or oneself, creates a toxic mindset that distances us from God's voice. The Bible is clear: "Do not judge, or you too will be judged." Matthew 7 verse 1. Is a critical spirit keeping you from hearing God clearly? When you focus on faults, mistakes, and weaknesses, either in yourself or in others, you create an environment of negativity. Instead of growing in grace, love, and humility, you become trapped in a mindset of self-righteousness or low self-esteem. But what if, instead of judging, you chose to pray? What if, instead of criticizing, you decided to uplift and encourage? How much would your life change? Criticism often comes from pride or insecurity. Some people judge to feel superior, while others criticize themselves out of deep wounds. But Joyce Meyer reminds us that God calls us to speak life, not condemnation. If you constantly find faults in others, it's time to shift your perspective. Are you looking at people through the eyes of grace or through the eyes of judgment? Learning to replace judgment with love and grace will transform your mindset. Instead of criticizing someone's struggles, remember that God is working in them just as He is working in you. Instead of tearing yourself down, remind yourself that God's grace is greater than your failures. Are you holding on to a judgmental spirit, or are you allowing God's love to change your heart? Hearing God's voice requires a heart that is soft, teachable, and filled with love. If you are constantly focused on criticism, toward others or yourself, you create a mental barrier between you and God's direction. Are you ready to break free from a judgmental mindset and step into a life of peace, grace, and divine clarity? One of the biggest obstacles to hearing God clearly is a mind consumed by problems. Joyce Meyer teaches that focusing too much on difficulties creates stress, anxiety, and spiritual disconnection. The Bible tells us, "Cast all your anxieties on Him, because He cares for you." 1 Peter 5 verse 7. But many people do the opposite. They carry their burdens alone and let their struggles drown out God's voice. Is your focus on problems blocking your faith? Worrying doesn't change anything. It only steals your peace. When you focus too much on your problems, you magnify them instead of magnifying God. It's like staring at a small obstacle through a magnifying glass. It will seem bigger than it really is. But if you shift your focus to God's promises instead of your struggles, you will find strength, clarity, and peace. What are you magnifying in your life right now? Problems or God's power? Many people pray but don't trust. They ask God for help, but then continue to stress over the same issues. Faith is not just about asking, it's about believing. If you truly trust God, you stop overanalyzing, overthinking, and stressing. Instead, you rest in the knowledge that He is in control. Are you letting God carry your burdens, or are you still trying to handle everything on your own? Instead of worrying about what could go wrong, start declaring what God has already promised. He has already given you the wisdom, strength, and provision to overcome challenges. Joyce Meyer reminds us that peace is a choice, and it starts with where you direct your thoughts. What could happen if you replaced your worry with worship? When you let go of the habit of focusing only on your problems, you will experience a breakthrough in your faith and spiritual clarity. God doesn't want you to be overwhelmed. He wants you to be filled with peace, direction, and strength. Are you ready to shift your focus from problems to God's power and step into a life of divine clarity? The modern world pushes people to believe that being busy equals being productive, but constant busyness can become a spiritual barrier. Joyce Meyer teaches that filling your schedule with endless tasks can make it difficult to hear God's voice clearly. If the mind is always racing, there is little space for peace, reflection, or divine guidance. This is illustrated in the story of Martha and Mary, Luke 10 verses 38 to 42. Martha was overwhelmed with responsibilities, while Mary chose to sit at Jesus' feet and listen. When Martha complained, Jesus explained that Mary had chosen the better path. The message is clear. God values connection over performance. It's not about how much is done in a day, but about whether those actions align with His purpose. Many people claim they don't have time for prayer or studying the Bible, but hours are easily spent on entertainment, social media, or unnecessary obligations. What is prioritized shapes the course of life. Joyce Meyer emphasizes that setting aside dedicated moments for quiet, prayer, and reflection is essential, not optional, for those seeking to grow spiritually. Even Jesus, surrounded by crowds, took time to be alone with God. If He, the Son of God, needed moments of solitude for renewal, how much more do we? Slowing down is not about doing less, but about making space for what truly matters. A life that constantly rushes forward without spiritual grounding risks running in circles. Reducing unnecessary busyness brings clarity, wisdom, and peace. A well-balanced life allows room for God's guidance to become evident. It's in moments of stillness that divine direction is often heard most clearly. Seeking approval from others is a trap that can slow down spiritual growth and block divine direction. Joyce Meyer teaches that living to please people rather than God leads to constant frustration, exhaustion, and a loss of identity. When decisions are made based on fear of rejection or the desire to fit in, it becomes harder to recognize God's voice and purpose. The Bible reminds us, we must obey God rather than men. Acts 5 verse 29. Many people struggle with the pressure to meet expectations, whether from family, friends, or society, but pleasing everyone is impossible. The more a person tries, the more drained they feel. Instead of chasing human approval, aligning one's heart with God's truth brings real peace. Joyce Meyer often shares that living for human validation creates a cycle of insecurity. There will always be people with opinions, criticisms, and expectations, but God's plan is not dependent on public approval. Learning to set boundaries and say no to unnecessary pressures is part of walking in spiritual freedom. Jesus Himself faced rejection, yet He never compromised His mission to satisfy the opinions of others. His focus remained on fulfilling God's will. Those who live seeking applause from the world may find themselves distant from their true purpose. Authenticity in faith comes from following God's guidance, not public opinion. Letting go of the need for external validation brings inner strength and clarity. When decisions are based on faith rather than fear, there is a greater sense of direction and confidence in God's plan. Living to please God rather than people is the key to spiritual freedom and purpose. Overthinking is one of the biggest obstacles to hearing God's voice clearly. Joyce Meyer teaches that when the mind is overwhelmed with doubts, fears, and endless analysis, it becomes harder to discern divine direction. Many people pray for guidance, but then second-guess every possibility, making it impossible to move forward with faith. The Bible says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." Proverbs 3 verse 5. Yet, overthinking often leads people to rely on human reasoning rather than divine wisdom. Constantly replaying scenarios, questioning decisions, or fearing the unknown creates a mental fog that blocks clarity. Faith requires trust, not endless analysis. Joyce Meyer emphasizes that the more a person overthinks, the more they hesitate in obeying God. Instead of acting with boldness, they remain trapped in indecision, waiting for perfect conditions. But true faith involves taking steps forward even when everything isn't perfectly clear. God's guidance often becomes visible only after obedience begins. Breaking free from overthinking starts with surrendering control to God. Instead of trying to predict every outcome, trusting in His wisdom allows for peace and clarity. The habit of overanalyzing everything does not bring security. It only increases stress and delays God's purpose. Faith is built in action, not in constant hesitation. Letting go of excessive thinking brings spiritual clarity and a stronger relationship with God. When the mind is no longer weighed down by fear and doubt, it becomes easier to recognize divine direction. Walking in faith means moving forward with trust, not waiting until every detail is perfectly mapped out.